Have you ever heard your own name whispered from a grave? Not in a dream, not in a hallucination, but in the freezing dark silence of a cemetery. When you know you're the only living person there? If not, then what happened to me on the night of November 18th will feel impossible. But I swear, everything you're about to hear is exactly as it happened.
Join us. Welcome home.
My name is Daniel Rowan. I hadn't been back to Hollow Creek for nearly 13 years, not since the night my childhood friend, Ben Carver, vanished without a trace. Police searched for months. His parents moved away. The case went cold. But people in town whispered something worse than kidnapping. They whispered about the cemetery. About grieving parents who heard their lost children calling from beneath the dirt. About graves that changed shape between dusk and dawn. I always thought it was superstition. A coping mechanism. Small-town ghost stories clinging to tragedy. I thought that, until my mother died. I came back for her funeral on a gray, bone-cold morning. The kind of cold that crawls under your skin like wet worms. After the burial, relatives tried to talk, to reminisce about her life, but something kept pulling at me, an old, sour dread that I thought I'd buried with childhood. When everyone finally left, I sat alone in my car, staring at the hill beyond the churchyard. The hill that led to Hollow Creek Cemetery. A place I once swore I'd never return to. But grief does strange things. It unearths memories you don't want, memories that taste like soil and fear. And something, I still don't know what, pushed me to go back there that night. Hollow Creek Cemetery looked smaller than I remembered. The iron gate was rusted, the archway bent, and the sign that once proudly read established 1892 was barely hanging by one screw. Cold fog slithered over the ground like it was alive. The moon was thin and sharp, a silver blade slicing through the darkness. I walked slowly, hands buried in my coat pockets, breath like smoke. Why was I here? I told myself it was nostalgia, closure, but the truth was uglier. For 13 years, every nightmare I ever had ended in this place. I followed the crooked path, gravel crunching beneath my shoes. Names and dates carved on tombstones stared back at me like silent accusations. That's when I heard it. A sound so faint I almost ignored it. Daniel. I froze. The fog shifted. The wind died. Everything went silent. Hello? My voice sounded too loud, like it didn't belong in this place. Nothing responded. I exhaled shakily. Probably just my mind. After all, cemeteries were perfect places for the brain to play tricks. But then, Daniel. This time it was unmistakable. A slow, dragging whisper, as if spoken through soil and broken teeth. My spine locked. My heartbeat hammered against my ribs. And the whisper came again. From the left. From the old section of the cemetery. From the part locals said no one should ever enter after sunset. I swallowed, breath quivering. This was insane. I should have turned around, walked out, gone home, packed my bags and left Hollow Creek forever. But I didn't. Because the moment I heard the whisper, something in that voice felt horribly familiar. And that terrified me more than the whisper itself. The fog thickened as I stepped off the main path. It curled around my ankles, tugging softly like small, cold hands. I moved between leaning tombstones, each one older and more weather-worn than the last. The whisper came again. Daniel, down here. My breath caught. I looked down. At first I saw only dead leaves. Then the outline of a grave. A small one. Child-sized. The headstone was cracked in half, the top missing entirely. No name. No date. Just a grave like an open wound. My stomach dropped. My pulse thrashed. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my feet were glued to the earth. Then I heard it, faint scraping, coming from inside the grave. Not an animal. Not the wind. Scratching. Slow, deliberate. as if something beneath the dirt was clawing upward. My throat closed. I stumbled back, tripping over a root. The soil in front of me shifted, lifted, moved, and then the whisper right against my ear. "I'm still here, Danny." My lungs froze. No one called me Danny except one person. Ben. My childhood friend. The boy who vanished 13 years ago. I scrambled to my feet, nearly slipping in the damp leaves. Trembling, I forced myself to look around. "Who's there?" I shouted, voice cracking. That's when I saw him. A man standing between two headstones about 20 feet away. Tall. Thin. Dark coat brushing the ground. Hat pulled low over his face. For a moment he didn't move. He just watched me. The fog curled around his legs like it was afraid to touch him. "Hey!" I yelled, breath shuddering. "Do you need help? Were you whispering just now?" He didn't answer. He didn't even shift. He just stood there, motionless, like a figure carved out of night. I took one step forward. He broke into a slow smile. Not warm. Not human. A wide, unnatural curve spreading across his pale face. My skin crawled. I blinked. And he was gone. Not walked away. Not ran. Gone. Vanished. The fog swallowed the space where he stood as if he had never existed. My legs nearly buckled. Cold sweat drenched my shirt. No. No, I didn't see that. Couldn't have. But the grave behind me shifted again. The soil rising in a small mound. The sound of scraping growing louder. A soft, childlike giggle floated from the dirt. I staggered backward. Straight into something solid. A hand clamped over my shoulder. I choked on a scream and spun around. But there was no one behind me. Only tombstones. Only fog. Only silence. Long, suffocating silence. I didn't remember running. One moment I was standing in the old section, and the next I was gripping the cemetery gate, chest heaving, lungs burning. I stumbled to my car like a drunk man, fumbling for the keys with freezing hands. I drove back to my motel, door slamming shut behind me as I collapsed onto the bed. For long minutes I just breathed. Trying to control the shaking. Trying to convince myself I hadn't just heard my dead friend whispering from an unmarked grave. It was a hallucination. Sleep deprivation. Grief. That's what I told myself. Until I saw the piece of paper on my nightstand. A folded square of old yellowed parchment. I stared at it, heartbeat lurching. I hadn't put anything on that table. I hadn't taken anything from the cemetery. I wasn't carrying anything but my keys. My fingers trembled as I reached for it. The paper smelled like damp earth. Like the inside of a grave. I unfolded it slowly. There were only 3 words written in a child's handwriting, messy, uneven, as if scribbled in the dark. "Why did you leave?" My vision swam. That was the last thing Ben said to me before he disappeared. The night he went missing. We had fought. A stupid childhood argument. And I left him there, by the woods, alone. I never saw him again. My hands shook so violently the paper slipped from my fingers. Something was terribly wrong. Something in Hollow Creek had waited 13 years. Something still knew my name. The second whisper. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the whisper again, soft, dragging, coming from beneath the floorboards. By dawn, I felt sick and hollow. I splashed cold water on my face and stared at myself in the bathroom mirror. Bloodshot eyes. Pale skin. Dark circles. I looked like someone who'd dug their own grave and forgotten to lie down in it. A knock at the door jolted me. I froze. 3 slow taps. I swallowed. Another 3 taps. I approached the door carefully, peering through the peephole. No one. Just an empty hallway. "Hello?" I whispered. Silence. I unlocked the door and opened it just a crack. No one was there. But something was on the floor. Another folded piece of yellowed parchment. My throat tightened. Hands trembling, I picked it up and unfolded it. This time, there were 6 words. "Come back. Ben is waiting below." Below. Below what? Below the cemetery? Below the ground? Below the unmarked grave? A cold, suffocating dread wrapped itself around my chest. I stepped back into the room and closed the door. But before the latch clicked, I heard it, soft, faint, impossibly distant. "Daniel." Coming from the motel's floorboards. From below. The motel room felt smaller than it had the night before, as if the walls had inched inward while I slept, as if the entire building was holding its breath and listening to me. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, clutching the second note in my hands, reading it again and again even though the words never changed. "Come back. Ben is waiting below." Every time I blinked, I saw Ben's face from the last night I ever saw him alive, his cheeks flushed from the cold, his breath visible in the air, his eyes confused and hurt when I told him I wanted to go home. The guilt that had lived quietly in the back of my mind for 13 years rose like bile, sharp and painful. The room spun slightly. I hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. My stomach was hollow, but the idea of food repulsed me. All I could think about was that grave. That whisper. That impossible voice saying my name with the same tone it used when we were children. I forced myself up and pulled open the curtains. Morning light seeped through, dull and cold, the kind that didn't warm anything. The motel parking lot was empty except for my car and a crow perched on a lamppost, watching me with unblinking eyes. I felt observed, exposed, like the world knew what I'd heard and what I was going to do. Because even though every rational part of me screamed to leave this cursed town, to drive until Hollow Creek was a distant on the map, I knew I wouldn't. Something had hooked itself into me. Something that knew my name, my past, my guilt. And it wasn't going to let go. I left the room around 9, locking the door even though I knew a lock wasn't going to keep anything out. The air outside was sharp, cold enough to sting my cheeks. The fog from last night had lifted slightly, but in the distance near the cemetery hill, I could still see thin strands of it drifting, like smoke rising from invisible fires. The road to the cemetery looked narrower than I remembered, framed by trees that had lost most of their leaves. Their branches twisted overhead, skeletal and black, scraping lightly against each other in the wind like bony fingers tapping for attention. When I reached the cemetery gate, the iron bars looked even more decayed in daylight. Rust had eaten through large patches, giving them a diseased appearance, and the padlock that should have been securing them hung broken, the metal twisted as if crushed by enormous force. I pushed the gate gently and it creaked open with a long groan, a sound like an old man waking up after 100 years' sleep. The wind carried a smell with it, earthy, damp, almost sweet but in a way that turned my stomach. The smell of soil that had been recently disturbed. I stepped inside. The cemetery was silent, but not the silence of peace. More like the silence of something watching, waiting. The gravel path crunched beneath my shoes, leading me past rows of headstones that leaned at awkward angles like they were exhausted from holding back their secrets. I felt the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes following me. It wasn't paranoia. It was instinct. An ancient instinct that screamed you are not alone here. As I approached the old section, the air grew colder. Not wind cold, but something deeper, something that seeped into my bones. The fog here clung low to the ground, swirling in small circles as if stirred by invisible hands. I could feel my pulse quicken with every step, each heartbeat louder and heavier. When I reached the area where I'd seen the unmarked grave the night before, I stopped so abruptly that my breath caught in my throat. The grave looked different. The soil wasn't just disturbed, it was sunken in, as if something beneath had shifted during the night. The mound had collapsed inward slightly, forming a shallow depression. Fresh dirt lay scattered around the edges like something had broken through and then retreated. My skin crawled. I told myself it could have been an animal. A raccoon. A coyote. Something hungry that dug down, disturbed the soil, anything but what I feared. But no animal could have produced a whisper in a child's voice. I knelt beside the grave, unable to explain why. Maybe some part of me thought I'd find a clue. Maybe I hoped to see Ben's school jacket buried beneath the dirt. Maybe I wanted confirmation that I had finally lost my mind. But as I touched the soil, something happened that should not have been possible. The ground moved. Not much. Just a slight shift. A quiver. Like something beneath the earth had turned its head toward me. I yanked my hand back and stumbled to my feet, heart hammering so violently I thought it might burst. The fog shuddered slightly. And then the whisper came again, soft but clear, rising from the very place where my hand had just been. "Danny, you came back." I staggered backward, breath catching in my throat. The voice was unmistakable. The same tone from childhood. The same rhythm of speech. But older now, strained, aching, as if dragged across years of darkness. I wanted to run. Every part of me screamed to flee. But something else, some terrible, magnetic pull, held me frozen in place. A shadow moved in the corner of my vision. I jerked my head up. A man was standing between two tall headstones, his dark coat brushing the grass, hat casting a long shadow across his face. The same man I'd seen the night before. The one who vanished like smoke. This time he didn't smile. He just watched me, head tilted slightly, like he was studying an insect pinned beneath a glass jar. I felt my breath falter. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely more than a rasp. He didn't answer. I took a step back. His head tilted further, almost unnaturally far, like his neck had more joints than it should. Then slowly, he raised one hand. His fingers were unnaturally long, too thin, the skin tight and pale as if stretched over bone. He pointed at the unmarked grave. My throat closed. "No," I whispered. "No. I'm not." The man made a soft clicking sound with his tongue. A sound that echoed far too loudly in the silent cemetery. And then, he stepped backward. Not turned, not walked, but glided. His feet didn't move. His coat didn't sway. He simply slid into the fog, disappearing as if swallowed by it. The moment he vanished, the ground beneath me trembled. The grave exhaled. A gust of cold air rushed upward, smelling like rot and childhood memories. I clamped a hand over my mouth, stumbling backward, nearly losing my footing. Something beneath the soil shifted again, more violently this time, as though trying to push upward. Then I heard it. A knock. 3 slow knocks. But not on wood. On the inside of the coffin. I ran. I don't remember how I got back to the motel. My next memory is bursting through my room door and collapsing on the floor, chest heaving, vision blurred by panic and exhaustion. I crawled to the bed and lay there for what felt like hours, listening to my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. I kept expecting the knock to follow me. To hear it on the motel walls. Or on the floorboards. Or on the inside of my mind. When my breathing finally settled, I sat up and reached for my phone. I needed answers. I needed to know if Ben had ever been buried. If anyone had found remains. The police had always said there was no body. But then who, or what, was beneath that grave? Before I could dial, I noticed something lying on the pillow beside me. A third piece of yellowed parchment. I hadn't seen it when I entered. The pillow had been empty. I was certain of it. My chest tightened as I reached for it, fingers trembling violently. I unfolded the paper. This time there were 5 words. "Why did you let me die?" The breath left my lungs in a painful rush. I dropped the note and stood up too quickly, the room spinning around me. I pressed a hand to the wall for balance. My skin felt cold, too cold, like the chill from the cemetery had followed me back, clinging to my clothes and sinking into my bones. That was when the lights flickered. Once. Twice. Then went out completely. Darkness swallowed the room. I stood frozen, heart thundering in my throat. The air grew heavy, thick, as if the shadows themselves were pressing against my skin. Somewhere beneath the floor, faint and distant, I heard it again. A whisper. My name. And then, a quiet scrape. Like fingernails dragging across the underside of the motel room floor. I backed away slowly, hands searching blindly for the light switch. When I reached it and flicked it up, the lights snapped back on with a buzz. The room looked exactly the same. Except for one thing. Someone was standing in the corner. Still. Tall. Hat casting a shadow over his face. The man from the cemetery. He didn't move. Didn't breathe. Just watched me. But this time, he spoke. In a low, gravelly voice that sounded like dirt sliding across stone, he whispered. You shouldn't have come back, Daniel. He's almost awake. My knees nearly gave out. And then, he vanished. The lights flickered violently. And from below the floorboards, something slammed against the wood so hard dust rained from the ceiling. The whisper returned, louder now, filled with rage and longing. Danny, let me out. The floor buckled. I stumbled backward, tripping over the bed as a crack split across the floorboards like a lightning bolt. Something beneath was rising. Pushing upward. Trying to break through. The boards groaned. Splintered. Began to lift. And then the floor burst open with a violent crack. A hand, small, pale, dirt-covered, shot through the hole, fingers clawing desperately for the open air. I screamed. The hand tightened its grip on the floor, pulling, dragging, climbing out. And then, darkness swallowed everything. Alright guys, that wraps up part 1 of this horror series. If you want part 2 to drop ASAP, go ahead and smash that like button. Share this video with your friends who love a good scare, and make sure you hit that subscribe button with the notification bell turned on, that way YouTube will let you know the moment the next chapter goes live. Thank you so much for watching and spending your time with me tonight. You're the reason this channel keeps growing. I'll see you in the next one, if you're brave enough to come back.